Great. Well, Stephen was absolutely right when he described our panel as glittering. We do have a star-studded panel tonight, and you can see, their names up here, so I won't go through the introduction, but surely you're familiar with all of them. And, I mean, as Stephen and Achilles also pointed out, I mean, perhaps there has been no more moment in time where it has been as timely to hold a conference on the future of democracy, the threats that democracy is facing right now. And one of the channels that we are seeing that operate through is actually global trade. And so this panel is actually kind of dear to my heart because as the European economics correspondent for the New York Times, my colleagues and I have been writing about this nonstop pretty much since the so-called Liberation Day on April 2nd, when President Trump held up a cardboard board indicating the punitive tariffs that he would be putting on not only countries like China, rivals, but also on many American allies. And so I'm really happy to have not only experts on the panel tonight, but people who've actually, in many ways, most of them, been in the trenches dealing with the geopolitical and economic fallout of this, and trying to navigate through what U.S. Treasury Secretary called a policy of strategic uncertainty. So with that being said, Brando, you're next to me, but I'd love to start with you. Not only are you a member of the European Parliament, but you hold a very interesting position in that you are one of the key go-betweens for the European Union with the United States on trade. So it's only been 6 months. It feels like a lot longer than that. This far in, step back a little bit and tell us what you see as the economic and geopolitical impact of President Trump's effort to rewire global trade through tariff policy.
Well, first of all, I have to say the big issue in these weeks and months has been the unpredictability. In fact, we have seen a humiliating series of declarations coming from President Trump that were dismantling the negotiations ongoing or even acquired the results in the discussions between the European negotiators and the American counterparts. In fact, you could even see that after the humiliating, in my view, meeting in Scotland when the EU had to go outside the European Union to meet in a golf club of Trump to make an agreement. Just a few weeks after, literally tons of products that were not included as to be put into the super tariff of 50% that is linked to the steel and aluminium were suddenly included in the list. And so a big hit was put on the economy of the EU outside the deal that was just discussed a few days before. So unpredictability, uncertainty, and untrustworthy context is the most significant problem, because a good deal or a bad deal can be discussed. We will discuss that also as European Parliament. We will work around some elements that link to the title of this panel, Rethinking Trade, the End of Globalism. In fact, we still think we need some global set of rules, and we will fight so that the agreements that we are making under a big pressure, it's not only me saying it, but the Trade Director General of the European Commission has been saying in the Strategic Forum of Bled that this was not a normal trade agreement or trade negotiation. It was done under extreme political pressure, nowhere to be seen in other contexts. But as I said, we will, for example, work so that any agreement that we make will be made not permanent, so it will be renegotiable in some time. Why I'm saying this? Because this is something that would make it more WTO compatible. Do I think that the WTO is still alive? Not very much, because in fact, it was not working even before Trump. Now it's being hit again, and in general, the idea of having common rules for trade is under extreme attack, and this is a fact. But I think that this doesn't mean that we should abandon the idea of having a global set of rules, and so we will continue fighting for having clarity, having a set of rules that can be applicable to everyone, to all our trading partners. And in fact, I think that with the many countries in the world, starting from the other G7 countries, the G20, and the rest of the world that wants to build some basic common rules to create stability and to create some certainty in this very uncertain context, we will fight for getting that through, and not accept a situation where every day we wake up waiting for declarations that can change everything again and again.
Yeah, I think there are many people who hope that that is a world that we will see, but that's an issue that I want to get back to in our discussion. In particular, can you really succeed at that when you basically have a country that represents almost 25% of the global economy that doesn't want to play along right now? Chrystia, so great to have you with us tonight. Thanks for coming all the way from Canada. Now, you've actually seen this before because even though, and by the way, congratulations on your new role. You were just appointed to be the special representative for the reconstruction of Ukraine. But certainly before that, obviously, you have been in Canadian politics for a long time. You were previously the Deputy Prime Minister, Foreign Minister, and the Trade Minister. And so back in 2018, if I remember correctly, you had sort of your first brush with under the first Trump presidency when he put tariffs on Canadian steel and aluminum. Now, you know, with the second presidency, we saw that Canada was really one of the first countries in his crosshairs. So I'm curious, first of all, how is the way that Donald Trump the way that he is operating on tariff policy different today than what you experienced during the first presidency? And what is Canada doing, basically, to navigate through that uncertainty and to build up a resilience for the future?
Okay, well, thank you very much, Liz. Thanks for the introduction, and it is great to be here. Listening to your question, I'm reminded of something very nice about being Canadian, which is we have trade deals with every country represented on this panel. We have a trade deal with the EU, which I negotiated, very important deal for us. Thank you very much. European Union. We have a trade deal with South Korea, negotiated by the previous government, supported by my party when we were in opposition. Thank you very much. And we do have a trade deal with the United States, which was actually Donald Trump's trade deal supported by Nancy Pelosi. It may be one of the only things that Donald Trump and Nancy Pelosi both supported. That's pretty good. I want to just start by commenting on something that Brando said about the uncertainty and how problematic that is. And there was a moment in our first NAFTA negotiations when, you know, we were having a negotiation and the Canadian side was talking about a measure we wanted in the deal to introduce more certainty. And the answer we got from across the table was, no, we want uncertainty because we want to discourage investors from investing anywhere other than the United States. And
so there is something to strategic uncertainty.
So for me, that is not news. What I would say, though, is when I talk to American business leaders and American investors, they are starting to find the uncertainty very troubling because the uncertainty applies to them too. U.S. companies depend on trade from the rest of the world. And if they have no idea what kind of tariffs their inputs are going to be subject to, it makes them much harder to make decisions. So I think the uncertainty cuts both ways. I'll just make sort of two more comments. I think the first one is, dear Europeans, you guys are great. I think you may not realize quite how remarkable the European Union is, and quite how important the EU is right now. You know, there is this idea, John Winthrop talked about the city on a hill. I think you guys right now are the city on the hill. Certainly when it comes to a rules-based international order. And I really hope that the Europeans here, that you will sort of have the courage of your convictions and really know that there are a lot of countries in the world looking to Europe, keen to support you, keen to help you in that endeavor. And I think it starts with trade. And then the final thing I want to say is just about the United States. Something that we as Canadians, with, you know, the world's longest unmilitarized border is the border between Canada and the United States. To give you a sense of the closeness of the relationship, it actually runs through a library. This is true. You can go just walking across a room in the library. You're part of, some of the books are in Canada, some of the books are in the United States. So we have a very close relationship. And one thing that we have been saying to our American partners is, we've been your partners for such a long time. We are a security ally. The fact that Canada is, that you have the world's longest undefended border with Canada, that you have that security, is a big reason the United States has been so successful. The fact that the United States has such a strong partnership with the EU, with South Korea. And the thing that I think is important for us, the historic friends and allies of the United States, to be sure our American partners understand, is that this uncertainty, what Brando has described as these episodes of humiliation, these measures which are put in place on the grounds of national security, so that we are actually maybe not a national security partner, they put a real strain on that partnership, which has been at the heart of not just the rules-based international order that we put in place at the end of the Second World War, I would say of the flourishing of democracy and prosperity over the past 80 years. And I think it's important for our American friends to know that that erosion is happening.
Yeah. So, Brando, you have your work cut out for you for sure. On that point, Mary Beth, I mean, you're the Deputy Secretary General at the OECD. You're also, you know, have long time been a career diplomat with the State Department. At one point, you were practicing international trade law. Mm-hmm. Just bouncing back for a moment to the issue of uncertainty and the impact that has had economically. The OECD has been putting out a series of reports essentially chronicling how, contrary to the promise that this would create prosperity, that it's actually dealing a blow to global growth, and in particular to, you know, the future of economic growth in the United States. Can you talk a little bit about how that uncertainty is impacting on an economic level, and in particular also global business investment? Sure. With companies really having to figure out, how do I deal with this when I've got a 25% tariff here, a 15% tariff there, or whatever?
No, thank you, and it's really a pleasure to be here. At the OECD, we very much pride ourselves on the data and the analysis and really digging into these issues. So it's safe to say that some of our folks have never been busier, because there is a lot right now that is changing very quickly, and it bears really analyzing. So to put it mildly, this is a moment of profound transformation. This post-World War II economic model, the economic international order that we've come to rely on, was and has been increasingly built on openness and a rules-based trading system. All of that is under pressure right now. What we have is a really complex mix of tariffs, economic fragmentation, rule fragmentation, great state intervention, strategic rivalry, increasing concerns about economic security. It just goes on. And all of this is reshaping how countries and corporations are engaging in the international economic order right now. The answer is we don't know the full effect of these tariffs yet, because they haven't truly been felt fully yet. We've had this on-again, off-again nature with so many changes being announced and then phasing of some of them being announced. Initially, companies absorbed a lot of these tariff increases, but that is not sustainable. And it's becoming increasingly visible that the tariffs are starting to be felt, not just in the United States, but around the world, when we look at the spending choices of consumers, when we look at labor markets, and when we look at basic consumer price index and how that is starting to really evolve. So the immediate effect of the tariffs has been greater uncertainty, and that's exactly what the investment climate does not want. For the larger economies, we've been able to see that this means a slower amount of investment and more expensive imports. But when you look at the smaller economies, it really can translate into hardship, actual hardship for citizens, because they have much less fiscal space with which to maneuver at the macroeconomic level, and because these smaller economies are much more exposed when the global rules start breaking down. So with all of the heightened geopolitical tensions, what we're really starting to focus on is the concerns, and they're very real concerns, about resilience in the system and about the structure of global supply chains. So when we start seeing this look and really price out the points in global value chains, it's not just hitting countries where we have, the United States raising tariffs against Canada, because there are so many countries and so many economies that contribute pieces of that global value chain, even if the ultimate goods are assembled in Canada, because we, as major economies, are importing from all over the world to make that global value chain. So this really is having global impact. Yeah. Now, I wouldn't be representing the OECD very well if I didn't give you a few actual statistics, but I promise not very many.
Yes, yeah.
Okay, so what we've seen is that for global growth, it has been more resilient than we anticipated. And at first, that was a bit confusing when we start thinking about that. We're moderating right now global growth. 3.3% was what we had in 2024, and we're looking at 2.9% global growth in 2026. But that is based on the fact that so much of this is been stockpiling trade. Right? We've been able to really weather the storm better initially than we expected. And the economic outlook that the OECD produced for the first half of 2025 shows that. It's stronger than expected. But all of those inputs are based on short-term factors.
Things are going to slow.
Things are going to change. That is absolutely
I would love for you, let's come back to that, because we want to get into that in a little bit more detail. It's totally relevant to painting, the bigger picture of what's going on. So that's great. And as has been mentioned, the tariff uncertainty is hitting, obviously, not only Europe, Canada, but other parts of the world as well. And I'm really happy to have Jae-Young Lee, otherwise known as Elliot, with us tonight. I really appreciate you being here. Victor Gao was not able to make it, but it's really great because Asia also has had a very strong relationship with the United States for such a long time, but South Korea is an interesting kind of case study about the way these tariffs are about the way the United States is using the tariff policy right now. Back in July, Donald Trump said that he was going to put 25% tariffs on South Korean imports and higher tariffs on certain other imports, including steel and cars and whatnot. But then a deal was worked out where that tariff rate would be lowered to 15% on the condition that South Korea pay $350 billion up front to the United States in immediate investments that the United States would control. And now the government is basically saying there's no way we can put up that kind of money without going into a financial crisis. So, Elliot, you were previously in the South Korean Parliament. You are with the Conservative Party. You're a professor now. But tell us a little bit about how this entire scenario has painted South Korea into a corner. And is it forcing, what types of hard choices is it forcing South Korea to make?
Well, whenever we talk about Trump, we talk about how crazy he is. But I'm just coming from a country that had martial law declared, had a president impeached, second time from my party, less than 10 years, imprisoned president, his wife is imprisoned, and we had a snap election, and my Conservative Party is completely destroyed at this moment. So, my imagination, the boundary has been completely shattered, which means that, whatever Trump is doing, to me, from my perspective, it's relative. It's imaginable. Maybe it's not that crazy. But putting that joke aside, when we look at the tariffs, how Trump is using tariffs, I try to look at the recent history and I try to look at the bigger picture. So if you go back to Obama administration, there was that report revitalizing the American manufacturing in 2016, which was done under the Obama administration about reshoring. And then we moved on to Trump, and we had that, up to 25% tariffs on China, on $370 billion, which was never been dropped by Biden administration. Even he redirected it so that he had a higher tariffs on batteries and some other items from China. And CHIPS Act, which again was supporting the reshoring and onshoring, the whole movement. And now we have a tariffs Trump. So if you look at 15 years or even 10 years of this recent American movement, if you look at the direction, it seems like what they've been trying to do is really bring the manufacturing back to their country. And they've been quite consistent whether it was left or right. So it had a pretty much a open precursor or trailer of where this was going. Now, obviously, some of the companies in Korea, large, chaebols with assets and, the means to do it, moving some of the manufacturing sites to United States. Samsung recently announced that they're going to, increase the manufacturing, the fab in Texas. And that was announced in 21, and I think they broke the ground in 22. All done in the Biden administration with the CHIPS Act. So having said that, what Trump is doing, although the means are definitely different. I mean, Obama, Biden's been more of an incentives, providing funds to, bring the people back to the United States. And Trump, again, using the tariffs as a weapon, pressurizing or demonizing people who's trying to move outside. So it's different tactics, and obviously the tone and manner of what Trump is trying to say is uncomfortable. But looking at from 10,000 miles away from Korea, I think we're in a sort of different situation than maybe our friends from Canada or Europe or even from the United States, that we look at this as a national security issue. And we look at it as a national security issue in a sense that what has Korea done over the past half century? So if we're going to go back to what experts say, this is the second phase of the Cold War, it's about picking side. Are you going to go with the United States or are you going to go with the China? And we have a long history with China. We have the North Korea right next door. We know what China has been doing for the past 20 years or 30 years, or recently, very provocative ways and means to do handle their economy. The sheer amount of subsidies the government and Chinese government is putting in it's immense. And then obviously geopolitics is a very different situation. So
who are you going to choose?
Well, obviously, looking at what we've been achieving for that history, I think it's clear that we have to choose the United States. Now, having said that, we're not going to just listen to everything. We're pretty mad about $350 billion upfront investment. We can never afford it. So in that sense, we're kind of pissed off at our own government as well, just because we didn't understand why they would make such a promise of investing $350 billion when we had a tad over $400 billion in currency reserve. So I think, again, I think a lot of people are saying that we do not know the repercussion or the end result of what this tariff is going to be. We've only entered the phase. Uncertain is great. We're to be seen. But I think in Korea, I think we are, both left and right, are willing to work with what's there, the reality, facing the reality, taking out all the noises and come up with the solutions to deal with Trump and this new order.
Right. And Chrystia, you wanted to say something?
Yeah, I think you make some excellent points, Elliot, and bringing in the security aspect in China is so important. And I think it is really important for us not to romanticize peak globalization. And to be clear, there were things that weren't working. And principal among them was the idea that China, the world's second largest economy, could be brought into this system while playing by completely different rules. And I think you're quite right, Elliot, to say a bipartisan consensus had emerged in the United States that this just wasn't working. I think the famous David Autor, Gordon Hansen, David Dorn paper on the China shock, I think that's real. And we saw US politics responding to that. What is challenging about right now is I think the United States was quite effectively building a partnership with its allies to deal with this situation. And you saw Ursula von der Leyen talk about strategic resilience. We had the idea of friendshoring being put forward, and that there would be closer trading relationships among allies who could rely on each other.
And less on the United States.
And a shared policy towards issues that I think we should have legitimate concerns about, like Chinese overcapacity in steel. Really important, and we can be more effective working together. And I think we were actually collectively doing a pretty good job of building policies and work on that. What is challenging about the current moment, to quote, I'm afraid I'm going to quote a piece that was published in the Wall Street Journal, Liz,
That's okay.
by Bob Zoellick, the former president of the World Bank. And Bob had this great line where he said, what is really paradoxical about the current situation is that America's allies are being faced with more pressure than the country that, at least in principle, America sees as the biggest challenge in trade relations.
Brando, is that a good thing or a bad thing?
No, but I want to instead quote, in this case, the New York Times, because...
Thank you for doing that.
Because on the political nature of the tariffs, there was a very important editorial piece by President Lula recently on the front page of the New York Times. And in fact, what I wanted just to add to what was said that I agree on is that it's absurd that we do not work instead on the overcapacity, which is today the biggest concern for the European manufacturers, but also for the American ones. This overcapacity and flooding of especially the steel area, I know very well, that has been put in written in this agreement between the EU and US, the one of the 21st of August. There is a long chapter paragraph about this point, that we should work in this, that there should be a steel union, but then nothing is happening. Instead, we are going backwards. When I say about uncertainty, it's exactly that there was some step forward on this on paper, but in the practical terms, the US are not advancing on this. And this is absurd, because it's a common concern in terms of the actions that we see coming from China. So there is a lot of space for cooperation also with Trump, US, but there must be the willingness to do that instead of just challenging the allies to try to, if I may say in the case of Europe, blackmail us for the security concerns, for our inability to actually have our own defense and security in place without the support of the American side, and using that to obtain unilateral concessions on various areas, including the trade part.
I'm going to come in if I could, because despite the headlines, whether you're reading the Wall Street Journal or the New York Times or any other paper, there are a lot of headlines these days about trade. Okay. But despite the headlines, the reality is that the multilateral trading system continues to anchor the global economy. That's just the reality, right? The WTO rules remain indispensable. Every single day, we have billions of dollars of trade that is crossing borders following the multilateral trade rules that have been negotiated in place. And that system is far from perfect, right? We know we need to improve it, but it is still governing about 74% of the world's trade volumes on a daily basis. So we've got to work on it and build on it, but it is still holding for the moment.
I just have to caution us. I know you're not suggesting complacency, but I think the challenge is very real, and the pressure that I fear that is coming is when the world's biggest economy pursues a protectionist approach, it is very hard for the rest of the world not to follow suit. And that, I'm sure, is internal pressure in all of our economies to do the same thing. So I think it's important for us not to understate the magnitude of the challenge to the global trading system.
So let me just, we're going to have about 5 minutes or so for questions. So please get your questions ready and raise your hand if you have a question so that we can bring the microphone to you. It's kind of hard to see anybody from here under the spotlight. But before I turn it over to you guys, I mean, this brings me to one of the questions that I would love it if you could answer pretty quickly. I can't say Twitter headline anymore, like X headline style, popcorn style, and that is, so given everything that you all just said, if you had to predict, what will the global trading map look like 10 years from now? Will it be dominated by these big regional blocks? Will the United States actually wind up kind of isolated because everybody's trying to form stronger alliances among themselves, so it's not, even though America is a huge market, will a new form of globalism emerge?
In my view, there probably will be more protectionism overall, but this could be contained and could be done in a reasonable way. And also there could still be international rules, because, as I said, I am fighting with other colleagues so that the agreements we made with the US are temporary, interim agreements, so that in some time there might be a new political situation and we can renegotiate and maybe send a different message, a different direction, because I agree that this can have lasting effects on the overall approach to trade at the global level.
Okay. Chrystia?
Maybe surprisingly, I'm going to try to be an optimist.
We need that.
And I've been reading a lot of commentary from Europeans and Americans in the interwar period. And people who are not economic historians might be surprised to be reminded that Keynes actually was a protectionist during that period. And he talked about how actually World War I showed that we had peak globalization. It didn't work. What we need is national economic self-sufficiency. Well, then there was a Great Depression and a Second World War, and he changed his mind, and we rebuilt globalization. Kind of a sad story to tell for an optimistic conclusion. But my point here is trade actually works. Trade, if you do it right with partners who are following the same rules, and I would say with partners who have security relationships with each other, trust each other, that makes everybody richer. And, you know, as a former finance minister, if you have a policy that doesn't cost you any money and is going to increase the size of your economy, that's a pretty fantastic policy, and that's basically what trade deals do.
Elliot, are you, sorry.
So I'm just going to say, so I actually have confidence that the force of gravity of that economic reality is going to bring us all, including the United States, back.
Elliot, I can't tell from the look on your face whether you're that optimistic or not.
So the reason I was a bit blunt about, you know, Trump's this posture is that because I don't worry that much. I think the global trade is there, like she said. It's the sheer size of it is just it cannot go away. Mm-hmm. Plus, I think this situation will create new opportunities for countries to form different types of coalitions. I think it's going to have, and it's impossible to restructure the supply chain in this moment. Not everything can go to the United States. So I think, again, I think global trade is live. I think it's going to be still 10 years from now.
Yeah.
Be surprisingly very resilient in terms of how much it's contributing to the global economy.
All right.
I'm gonna go with Elliot here. This is not a story about the end of globalism. Like, trade is too dominant. We've all gotten too dependent upon it because we want to be able to be connected and have all the things from all over the world. Yep. But I'm hoping that as we hear, every crisis is an opportunity. And I am hoping that this is the opportunity where countries can come together with or without the United States right now. They can come together and really work on fixing the system because it does need to be more open, more inclusive, and far more sustainable.
Great. All right. Now we've got time for maybe one or two quick questions from the audience. Can somebody hand out microphones? I can't see. I see a lady over there whose hand is up. And a gentleman over there. And that's unfortunately all we're going to have time for, but so let's give this lady a microphone, and the gentleman as well. Are there microphones?
Okay. You want me to start?
Okay.
Yes. Okay.
All right. Maybe just shout your question.
I'll try. Thank you very much, Liz. My name's Alex. Give me, please. You talked a little about the need for, just at the end of the conversation, of countries that support the liberal forms based in order to work together. You talked about steel overcapacity. Thank you.
Yeah.
You talked about steel over. Yeah, I'm fine. The flip-up switch.
We're going to be on our feet.
You talked about steel overcapacity as one of the issues countries should be tackling, but there's obviously a far bigger reform agenda for the WTO. What do you think it should focus on?
Who wants to take that one really quickly?
I'll start by saying I actually think the beginning is to do plurilateral deals and to have groups of like-minded countries do deals on issues where their interests are fully aligned.
Yeah. I agree. I'm working on the one, for example, on e-commerce, and I think we should go on in this direction because we cannot accept a paralysis. Instead, I see interest for going on. So let's go on and overcome this kind of stalling, of veto situation.
Yes, sir. You had a question. Yeah. Is there? All right. Over here.
There we go.
It's a very important question he's running. I love that.
Thank you so much. So my question here is, do you think in a bigger picture, the situation is a preparation or a process of entering a multipolar world? In another word, when we see the United States attacking its closest partners, where they're breaking the stereotype of the axis of East and West, do you see this as part of entering a multipolar world era? And do you think the other partners or the rest of the globe can take it as an opportunity and make it an inclusive and healthy multipolar world era, and not switching from two axes, West and East, to another axis, for example, China and Iran and Russia? So
is the question
in a bigger picture,
whether we're headed toward a multipolar world?
yeah. So
Yeah.
is this
Yes.
war? Is it a part of entering a multipolar world era? And if yes, how we can make sure this multipolar world era is safe?
Yeah.
That we can shift from
Yes. Okay.
two axes to multipolar world for real, not to shifting from two axes to other two axes, such as like Russia, China, and Iran.
Thank you. Who would like to answer that one?
The risk I see is that we end up with just a world of spheres of influence. I think this is the idea behind some of what we see, that we do not have a multipolar world, but we have a few hegemonic powers that actually dominate parts of the world. I suspect that this is an idea that is somehow liked by President Trump, and that is bringing him to establish certain relationships with other leaders. But this is not the multipolar world. I think the multipolar world to exist and could be a good idea. I am personally a European federalist, so I'm in favor of the emergence of various poles in the world that can be more and more united and have a dialogue on an equal basis. But to do that, we need to restore a form of world order, of international rule of law. That is not the case of today, but I think Europe and those that believe in the same way should work together in this direction. The alternative is spheres of influence based on power, on threatening, on sometimes even blackmailing.
Great. Well, thank you. And let's.
And I was just going to say,
quick last word.
We did have a multipolar world in the 19th century, the concert of nations, right? And that wasn't so great. So I am, as a person from a middle power, all for many different countries having a voice. But I think we should not overlook how powerful the key rules of the global game that were established after World War II were. And we should fight really hard to maintain them.
Well, we will end on that optimistic note, and also seconding Mary Beth's comment that, sometimes these challenges do bring a huge new opportunity if used the right way. Thanks to all of our panelists for a really great discussion. I hope you guys got a lot out of it. And I'll welcome Achilles up to introduce our next round. Thank you.